So I want to take just a moment before we get going on today's message to thank Mr. Matt Brown. You know, Pastor Kyle is out of town, and so he did a great job leading our praise team. And so thank you to you and the woman who really makes it happen, your wife, and the whole praise team as well. Y'all are amazing, and it is a blessing to have you lead us in worship. So let's start here. I'm wondering if you can help me with this statement. I'm guessing you've heard it before. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Okay, so you've heard that statement before. It's a very famous statement. Now, here's the question I have for you. Is this very famous statement, is it true or is it false? It is false. Now, I got to tell you, I kind of wish that it was true. But if you have ever been on the receiving end of somebody's harsh words, then you know that saying is totally, completely false. Maybe you learned that statement was false when you were dating someone and you were sure that that one was the one that you were going to marry. Maybe you had even bought a ring, but then one day they come into you and they say, hey, I need to talk to you. And this is what they say: I think we should see other people. Or maybe if they want to let you down a little bit more easy, they say something like this: I think we should just be friends. And all of a sudden you realize that sticks and stones may break your bones, but those words really hurt you. Sometimes it's not in what people say. Sometimes it's in what people don't say that hurts us. Maybe you grew up in a family where you never had a father who said words like these: I'm proud of you. Or maybe you never had a mother who said words like these: I love you. And you learn simply because of what they didn't say that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words, they can really hurt you. In fact, I was thinking about this. Sticks and stones may break our bones, but words, the problem with words is that they can break what matters the most, because words can break our hearts. So this weekend at Zion, we're wrapping up a series we've been in for the past several weeks called Running on Empty. And just in case you haven't been here, I'll kind of catch you up. The big premise behind this series is that we live in a world that in a lot of ways seems almost destined and determined to wear us out and to run us dry and to leave us empty. And we've all experienced this in various ways. Maybe for you, it's your job that's leaving you running on empty. You go to work and you give it all you got, and by the time you get to the end of the day, you got nothing left to give. Or maybe for you, you're in the middle of a relationship that is not going well, maybe with one of your kids, and you pour and pour and pour everything out to them and into them, but no matter how much you give them, they never give you anything back, and you feel like that relationship is falling apart and you're left running on empty. In this series, we're taking a look at some of those things that leave us feeling empty, and then we're asking this very important question: how can God fill us up? Now, this weekend, as we wrap up our series, we're going to be talking about how the words that we choose and use can actually leave us running on empty. Now, to get at this, we're going to be taking a look at a section of Scripture from the back of the New Testament. We read it a little bit earlier in the service. It's from a book called James, and James is written by a guy named, unsurprisingly, James. Now, James is most famous for who he is related to. Some of you may know this. James was the half-brother of somebody pretty important. You know who James was the half-brother of? Jesus. Now, here's what you need to know on background about Jesus. Jesus, among other things, was an absolute master at choosing and using words. In fact, I figured we'd do a little Bible quiz this morning. You guys ready? I want you to complete the following Bible verses. We'll start with John 8, verse 7. Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a what? Stone. All right, good. You're 1 for 1. Here we go. Second one, Matthew 7, verse 1. Judge not, lest ye be what? Judged. All right, 2 for 2. How about this one? Matthew 16, verse 26. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and yet forfeits his... Man, you guys are good. Now, these are all sayings and statements from Jesus, and my guess is, even if you didn't grow up in church or come to church a lot, my guess is you've heard these statements before, and you may even know these statements by heart, and here's why. These statements are sticky. They're memorable, and they're profound. Because Jesus was a master at words. And so what James is going to do in his little book in the back of the New Testament is he's going to take some of those lessons that he learned from his half-brother about choosing and using words, and he's going to give us a warning about how we choose and use our words. And so, here are James's words about words. James 3, beginning at verse 2. When it comes to our words, James says, we all stumble in many ways. Now, right out of the gate, I need to pause right here because James begins with a very important admission. And here's the very important admission. James says that no matter how good you might be with words, you will never be as good with words as my half-brother was with his words. There's going to come a time where even if you're a real smooth talker, you're going to open your mouth and insert your foot. It happens to all of us. So, years ago, my wife, Melody, and I, we were celebrating one of our first Valentine's days. And so she got me a very nice gift and a very sweet Hallmark card with a very kind of like saccharine, sentimental, sugary message in it. In fact, I brought a picture of the card here. Here was the message on the inside of the card. It says, I love the special moments that we share when nothing else matters, only you and me. You're not only my husband, but my best friend as well. I love you. Now, isn't that sweet? Everybody go, oh. Yeah, okay. So every once in a while, I'll do this thing where I read cards out loud. And so I decided I was going to read this card out loud right there with Melody sitting right in front of me. But have you ever had one of those moments when you're reading something and your eyes do a little switcheroo on the words? Has this ever happened to you? Where you kind of stumble over your words? Okay, that happened to me when I was reading this card. Let's see if you can tell which two words I switched. So we're going to throw the card back up on the screen here. Okay, I love the special moments we share when nothing else matters. Only you and me, so far, so good. And then I get a little tongue-tied. And I say, you're not, and then I just switch two little words. You're not my only husband. And I read this out loud, and she gasps. And I gasp. And I think to myself, well, this is a heck of a way to tell me. On Valentine's Day with a Hallmark card? Now, I got to tell you, I get paid to use words. In fact, I get paid to read words out loud, and I've gotten, halfway fairly decent at it. But even if I know how to read like Bible words, I can't seem to read Hallmark words, and James tells us why. It's because no matter how good at words we may be, we all stumble with our words. In many ways. In fact, James continues, second half of James 3, verse 2, he says, anybody who's never at fault in what they say is perfect. And they're able to keep their whole body in check. James here actually gives us a very important principle. Here's the principle. If you can control your words, James says, you can perfect your life. Here's another way to put the principle, all right? If you are perfect in what you say, you will be perfect in every other way. Now, I know that sounds outlandish, but it's actually true. Here's why. Think about it like this. Every dumb thing that I have ever done has always begun with something that either I've said to somebody else or to myself. Hey, y'all, watch this. Right before I do something that lands me in the urgent care unit. Or if there's something I really want to buy and I know I don't really need it and we can't really afford it, how do you justify it? But it's on sale, I'll say to myself. And then I buy something I can't afford that I don't really need, but I just kind of want. Every dumb thing that I have ever done has always begun with something that either I have said to somebody else or myself. How about you? James's big point is this. Our words have incredible power over the whole course and direction of our lives, which is why we need to choose and use them so carefully. In fact, what James does is he continues, is he gives us a series of 3 illustrations that kind of demonstrate the power that words have over our lives. He begins by saying, anybody in here like riding horses? Well, I got an illustration for you. James 3, verse 3, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. So the average horse on the small side weighs about 1,000 pounds. On the big side, like a Clydesdale, can weigh almost 2,000 pounds. The average bit that you put into a horse's mouth weighs between 1.5 pounds and 2 pounds. And so an itty-bitty bit, just stick it into the mouth of a horse, and it can turn a big animal, something small, has a lot of power over something that's big. That's one illustration. Now, James says, maybe you're not a horse person. Maybe you're a boat person. Anybody in here like fishing, right? Going down to Lake Georgetown or maybe to the Gulf, going deep sea fishing over the summer? Well, if you like being on a boat, I got an illustration for you. James 3, verse 4. Let's take ships as an example. Although they are very large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot wants the ship to go. So the average rudder on the average ship comprises about 2% of the totality of the ship's hull. Comparatively, a rudder is very small, and yet it can steer a very big boat into a storm or away from a storm, into some waves or away from some waves. A small part of a big boat makes a big difference in where that boat goes. Now, James says maybe you're not a horse person, maybe you're not a boat person, but I know you're a fire person. Everybody likes to play with matches, right? So, try this illustration on for size, James continues. James 3, verse 5. Just consider with me for a moment what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. So last year in the state of California, there were over 8,000 wildfires. Burned to the ground over 1 million acres of land. You know how many of those fires were started by people? 95% of them. And in almost every single instance, it was just an accident. It was just a little campfire and one little spark. But one little spark can make a big difference in the whole landscape of a state. One spark can burn a lot to the ground. Something small can do something big. Now, here's where James lands all of his illustrations. He says, here's the point I'm trying to get at. James 3, verse 5 again. Likewise, the tongue. You know that thing in your mouth that you use to form and speak your words? Well, the tongue, it's a small part of your body. But man, can it make a big difference in your life? Because your tongue can make great boasts. So the average weight of the average human tongue is about 1/6 of a pound. The average weight of the average you. I'm going to let you figure that one out for yourself, okay? But it doesn't really matter how much or how little you weigh. Just in proportion to the rest of your body, your tongue weighs hardly anything. And yet, like a bit that you put into a horse's mouth, it can guide the whole direction of your life. Like a rudder that's on the back of a boat, it can steer the whole course of your future. And like a little tiny spark that lights a big fire, if you're not careful, you can light your life on fire and you can light the lives of everyone around you on fire. In fact, James continues with this warning, James 3, verse 6. The tongue is like a fire. It's a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body and it sets the whole course of your life on fire. Sticks and stones, James says, may break your bones, but if you're not careful, you would not believe the damage that your words can do. And so here's the question that James is kind of inviting us to wrestle with. How do we keep from burning everything down with our words? How do we choose and use our words better? Now, I'll say this again. We're never going to get perfect at this. The only one who was ever perfect at this was James's half-brother, Jesus. But even if we can't get perfect with our words, we can get better with our words. And so in the time that we have remaining in this message, that's what I want to talk to you about. Getting better with how we choose and use our words. And I just want to give you 3 strategies that may help you as you talk, because my guess is you're going to be talking sometime this week. And so strategy number 1, to choose and use your words better, you need to choose and use your words slowly. To choose and use your words better, you need to choose and use your words slowly. So if you back up a couple of chapters in the book of James, from James 3 to James 1, here's one of the first things that James says in his little book. James 1 verse 19, he says, "My dear brothers and sisters, I want you to make a note of this. Write this down, because this is really important. Everyone," that includes you and me, "everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak." Here's what James is saying. If you want to choose and use your words better, listen a lot and then be very slow before you say anything. Now, let's be honest about something. We all kind of struggle with this, right? In fact, most of us kind of live the opposite of this. We're not quick to listen and slow to speak. We're quick to speak and slow to listen. Because if somebody tells us a problem, what do we want to do? We want to dive in and fix it. And we're going to talk to them about it. Or if somebody says something incorrect, oh yeah, we need to raise our hand and correct it. We're going to set that record straight. And there's a reason why we want to be quick to speak and slow to listen. It's because we all believe something about ourselves. We all believe that if the world would just listen to me, what a better place it would be, right? We all kind of think that about ourselves. James says, don't think that about yourself. You don't need to dive in and start talking. You don't need to be the kind of person who, when somebody is pouring their heart out to you, you keep interrupting them because you want to give them all of your wisdom. Just zip it for a second and listen. You don't need to be the kind of person who, when someone is telling you something, rather than listening, you're formulating a response in the back of your head. Stop formulating, James says, and start listening. And here's the reason why. It's very simple. It's very simple, and it's universal. Given a choice, when it comes to you, would you rather be listened to or lectured at? Which one? All right, just extend the same courtesy to everybody else that you want extended to you. If you want to choose and use your words better, choose and use your words slowly. Listen first. Speak later. That's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2. If you want to learn how to choose and use your words better, learn how to choose and use your words sincerely. If you want to choose and use your words better, learn how to choose and use your words sincerely. In other words, say what you mean and mean what you say. In fact, this is exactly Jesus' point in our gospel reading for today from Matthew 21. So Jesus has this big crowd. They're gathered all around him. And he kind of takes a poll of the crowd. Matthew 21, verse 28, he says, "Okay, guys, I want to get your opinion on this. What do you think? There was a man who had two sons. And he went to the first son and he said, 'Hey, son, it's time to do some yard work. Grab the weed whacker, go out to the vineyard. It needs a little bit of care.' Now, the first son is totally disrespectful of his dad. He says, 'Nah, Pops, I got video games to play,' right? And he walks away, but then later, look at what happens. This very disrespectful son, he changes his mind. And he goes to work in the vineyard. Now, we'll do just a little bit of technical work here for you. The New Testament, originally written in Greek, and the Greek word for this phrase, changed his mind, is the word metamelemai, which means to regret something. And so the son, who's very disrespectful to his dad, begins to feel bad about being so rude. And so even if he's rude, he does the right thing. But Jesus' story isn't done yet. Verse 30, Jesus continues, "Then the father went to his other son and said the same thing. Time to do some yard work in the vineyard. And this son was very respectful. Salutes his dad. Yes, sir. But right after being respectful, he slinks away and doesn't do what his father has to say. He doesn't work in the vineyard. Now, here's where Jesus wants the crowd's opinion. He leans in and he says, now, out of these two, which one did what his father wanted him to do? And everybody knows the answer. They answer in unison. The first. Because even if the first son didn't say what was right, he did what was right. And come on. What you say is only as good as what you do. Your words are only as good as your works. Or the way that I learned it growing up, your actions speak louder than your words. And we know this. Maybe you grew up in a family where you were raised by a single parent, maybe your mom, and maybe your dad would make all sorts of grandiose promises to you about what you were going to do over the weekend, right? He was going to pick you up, and he's going to take you, and you were going to go to some sort of a carnival, or maybe to an amusement park, or maybe he was going to take you fishing. You were going to go see a movie, but then something always came up, and he never showed up. Grew up in a household like that? How'd that make you feel? What did that do to your heart? And which one would you have rather had? A dad who said the right thing, who made all sorts of grandiose promises, but then never followed through. Or a dad who said something like, sorry, I can't make it this weekend, but then showed up anyway. I mean, it's not even a contest, right? We all want someone who, in their words, is sincere, who says what they mean and mean what they say. And so I'm going to push here for a second, because this is important. If you're a person who makes promises that you can't keep, if you're a person who just says one thing to get by with another thing, stop it. Don't do that. Because you are hurting you and everybody around you. Your words matter. And we are called to be sincere. That's strategy number 2. Strategy number 3. To choose and use our words better, we are called to choose and use our words securely. To choose and use our words better, we're called to choose and use our words securely. One of the things that I've discovered is that part of the reason that we struggle with our words, it usually has to do with a little bit of insecurity that we harbor in our hearts. For example, when we gossip, why do we do that? Why do we cut other people down and say all sorts of bad things about them, and so that we can build ourselves up? And why do we want to build ourselves up? Because we're a little insecure about who we are, and so we figure if we're doing better than somebody else, that makes us feel better about ourselves, which is why we gossip. Or I was reading a fascinating survey the other day about people who post profiles on those dating apps. And maybe you have a profile right now on a dating app. If you do, I hope you find true love. Now, here's what was so fascinating about that survey. Over 50% of people who post a profile on a dating app lie about either their age, their weight, their height, or their career. Why do they do that? It's because they're worried that if they just tell the truth about who they are, nobody is going to click on their profile. And so the lies that they tell and the words that they choose reflect a little bit of insecurity in their hearts. And so if we're going to get better with our words, one of the things that we really need is we need something that is secure. We need a place where we can actually be confident with our words. So when I was a little kid, one of the things that I had for as long as I can remember is a little blanket. My mom actually sewed it for me. It was yellow, and she sewed on the front and stitching just a little train. And I took this blanket everywhere. I was awake with this blanket. I was asleep with this blanket. I actually called it not my blanket, but my blankie. And every once in a while, my blankie would get lost. And whenever my blankie would get lost, my family would have to put out an APB on my blankie because, I could not go to sleep without my blanket. In fact, I had my mom send me a picture of me with my blanket. I love this thing so much that when I would go to bed, I just wrap the whole thing around my face. Okay. Now, if you have a kid or a grandkid, maybe your kid has a blanket like this too. What do we call these kind of blankets? What do we call them? Security blankets. Isn't that a strange term to refer to these blankets? Because think about it. What kind of security do these blankets offer? Can they stop an intruder in the middle of the night? No. Can they keep your kid warm if it's really, really cold? No, they're usually not big enough or thick enough to do that. Are they an antiseptic? Can they stop the spread of germs? Most definitely not, right? Those things are so dirty, they don't stop the spread of germs. They promote the spread of germs. So, why do we call them security blankets? Here's why for our kids, for our grandkids. Whether they've had a good day or a bad day, at the end of the day, the blanket's just there. Whether they've had a happy day or a sad day, at the end of the day, the blanket is just there. Whether they've had a compliant day or a not so compliant day, at the end of the day, the blanket is just there. And just the blanket's presence, just the blanket's consistency, it's just always there, is enough to be a source of security for our kids. So, at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is talking to his disciples. And he gives them a very famous mission. Here's the mission. I want you to go into all the world, and I want you to make more of you. I want you to make more disciples, and here's how that's something you're going to do. You're going to baptize people. You're also going to teach people about me. You're going to talk to people about who I am, my life, my death, my resurrection. You're going to share your faith with strangers, Jesus says, all over the world. So let's all be honest about something. Anybody in here ever get a little nervous about having to share your faith? Anybody in here? It's a thing that I think a lot of people struggle with. If you do, you're not alone. Because we're always a little worried that maybe someone is going to say something that we can't respond to or ask a question that we can't answer, or we're going to stumble over our words. The cat's going to get our tongue. And so we're very insecure, and that's one of the reasons that sometimes we just don't do it. We just don't share our faith. If that's where you're at, let me offer you a little encouragement, okay? What you're experiencing in the 21st century, even Jesus' disciples in the first century experienced too. They struggled with their words. Which is why at the end of this mission, here's what Jesus gives to the disciples. He gives to them a promise of security. Because he knows that will help his disciples choose their words wisely. Here's what he says in Matthew 28, verse 20, and surely. What does that mean? It means securely. I am with you, how often? Always. At the end of a good day or a bad day, Jesus says, I'm with you. At the end of a happy day or a sad day, Jesus says, I'm with you. At the end of one of your very compliant and holy days, or one of your not so compliant and rebellious days, I'm with you. And just Jesus' presence, just his consistency, that he's going to be with you always, can be enough to offer you a source and a sense of security when you got some words to share. In fact, I should probably ask you, what if Jesus is right and what if his words are true? What if he really is always with you? Or to get a little bit more specific, what if he really is always listening to you? How would that change the way that you choose and use your words? What would you choose to say? What would you choose not to say? One more story. I got a couple of nephews, Noah and Nicholas, and they're all grown up now. They live in San Antonio. In fact, I officiated the wedding for the younger of my two nephews, Nicholas, a couple of weekends ago. But I don't remember them as grown-up guys. This is actually how I remember Noah and Nicholas. A couple of little cute boys. And when they were younger especially, they would spend a lot of time with Grandma, Melody's mom. And Grandma would watch them a lot of days because their mom was at work. And Grandma was fun, but Grandma also didn't take a lot of guff. And so there was this one day where my two nephews were acting, imagine this, like boys. And they were doing the things that a lot of boys do when they stick their fingers in their ears and hang their tongues out of their mouth and go, nah, that whole thing. And Grandma, it was fine, but she was trying to teach them manners and respect. And so she said to Noah and Nicholas, hey, pull your fingers out of your ears, stick your tongues back in your mouths. And one of them was very compliant. The other one, who shall remain nameless to protect the guilty, was not quite so compliant. He pulled his fingers out of his ears, but he kept his tongue hanging out of his mouth. And Grandma was tough. So she said, listen, you better stick that tongue in your mouth or I'm going to stick it back in your mouth for you. Yeah. I mean, she was coming after this little guy. And that's when my nephew said, but Grandma, I can't stick my tongue back in my mouth. Or as he would have said it, well, Grandma, I can't stick my tongue back in my mouth. And Grandma goes, well, why? And here's what he said. He said, Grandma, I love my tongue. And then he starts extolling the values of his tongue. He says, tongues are shiny. Yeah, that's one way to describe them. And beautiful. Now, when he said that, Grandma was laughing so hard that he got to hang his tongue out of his mouth for a dog like the rest of the day. You know, when it comes to the words that we choose and use, the words that we form with our tongues, we all have a choice. We can choose and use our words in ways that tear people down or build people up. We can choose and use our words in ways that are ugly or in ways that are shiny and beautiful. James's argument and James's plea is to choose and use your words wisely. Because sticks and stones may break your bones. But words, if you choose them poorly, they can really hurt you. But if you choose them wisely, they can bless the world. Proverbs 25, verse 11. The right word at the right time is like precious gold set in silver. That's the value of a well-spoken word. How do I know? Because a well-spoken word is what God has given to you. Just share that with others. Let's stand and pray. Heavenly Father, these are tough words from James, And yet, even though we all stumble in many ways, we never get our words right all the time, we thank you that your Son in the Scriptures is called the Word. I mean, he's so good at words, he's actually called the Word. And so, Father, may we listen for his voice. May we listen to his words, and may his words be reflected in our words and in our lives. And we ask this in his name. Amen.